Under the fractured moon, a kingdom's heirloom wept silver tears into the endless snow. Ilara stumbled through the whispering pines, her breath a ragged ghost in the freezing air. The wind clawed at her threadbare cloak, carrying the distant howls of the pack that had cast her out. Rejection burned deeper than the frostbite creeping up her fingers. A mate bond, severed before it could form. Her Omega essence deemed too fragile for the Alpha who had claimed her in haste, only to discard her like spoiled prey. "Unworthy," he had snarled, his eyes cold as the blade that nicked her throat in warning. Banished to the wilds beyond the Frostfang Mountains, she was left to the mercy of blizzards and beasts, her only inheritance the silver locket at her throat, warm against her skin despite the chill. It had been her mother's, etched with a crescent moon cradling a single star, a symbol of hidden paths and unspoken fates. Now it felt like a chain, heavy with the blood of forgotten dreams. The snow fell in relentless sheets, blanketing the world in a hush that amplified her solitude. Each step sank her deeper into the drifts, her bare feet numb, the metallic tang of blood from a split lip mingling with the pine-scented wind. She had been Liran's intended, the beta enforcer who rose through the ranks of the Silverclaw pack with ruthless ambition. Their union was to seal alliances, but when the moon's pull revealed her Omega heat too soon, too vulnerable, he recoiled. "A weakness I cannot afford," he spat during the ritual circle, the pack's eyes upon them like judging stars. The Alpha Elder's decree followed, exile, to wander until the wilds claimed her or she proved her strength by surviving. No one spoke of the deeper shame, her family's fall from grace, whispers of a tainted bloodline that carried the mark of the old gods, Omegas who dreamed too vividly, who saw threads of destiny others ignored. Ilara collapsed against a jagged boulder, the stone's icy bite jolting her from the haze of exhaustion. The locket slipped from her grasp as she fumbled to clasp it tighter, its chain snapping free in the wind. It tumbled into the snow, half buried, glinting like a fallen star. She clawed after it, fingers bleeding anew on the frozen ground, the pain a sharp reminder that she still lived. As she retrieved it, a faint warmth pulsed from its core, not fire, but something alive, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Legends spoke of such heirlooms, forged in lunar temples where the goddess wove fates from starlight and shadow. Her mother had worn it until the fever took her, murmuring of pathfinders, Omegas who guided lost souls through the veil. Ilara had dismissed it as fevered fancy, but now, alone in the white void, doubt gnawed at her resolve. Night deepened, the moon rising full and merciless, casting the forest in ethereal silver. Uivu de lobos ecoavam mais próximos, não os da matilha, mas selvagens, atraídos pelo cheiro de sangue e desespero. Ilara arrastou-se para uma caverna rasa, o vento uivando como um lamento fúnebre. Dentro, o ar era úmido e carregado de musgo antigo, um fraco brilho de bioluminescência dançando nas paredes como veias de luar congelado. Ela se encolheu no chão, o locket pressionado contra o peito, seu calor uma âncora contra o vazio. Sonhos vieram em fragmentos, visões de um rei coroado em espinhos de gelo, olhos cinzentos carregados de culpa, um reino desmoronando sob o peso de traições não vingadas. "Você é o fio que reconecta", sussurrou uma voz etérea, a deusa talvez, ou apenas o eco de sua própria loucura. Acordou com o crepitar de neve sob passos pesados. O luar filtrava-se pela entrada, delineando uma silhueta imensa, um lobo em forma humana, armadura prateada manchada de vermelho escuro, o sangue de batalhas recentes. Ele era alto, ombros largos como as montanhas, mas sua postura carregava o peso de uma coroa invisível. O rei Alpha Thorn, herdeiro do reino moribundo de Eldrath, sem companheira, sem herdeiros, seu trono ameaçado por rivais que farejavam fraqueza. Ele havia herdado um legado de cinzas, pai assassinado em uma emboscada, matilhas aliadas desertando, o sangue de inocentes manchando suas mãos em nome do dever. Culpa o consumia como um veneno lento. Ele caçava sozinho agora, fugindo de conselheiros que tramavam sua queda, buscando respostas nos confins selvagens. Seus olhos, cinza como aço forjado sob tempestades, fixaram-se nela. Instinto primal o alertou, Omega, ferida, sozinha. Mas havia algo mais, um puxão sutil, como o locket aquecendo em resposta ao seu olhar. Thorne hesitou, a mão no punho da espada, o vento carregando o cheiro de fumaça e ferro de seu corpo exausto. Ele não era o monstro das lendas. Era um homem quebrado, marcado por uma cicatriz antiga no pescoço, lembrança de uma traição que custara a vida de sua prometida não marcada. Capturá-la seria fácil, uma prisioneira para barganhar com pecs rivais, ou pior, uma distração de sua caçada por redenção. Mas o luar dançava em seus olhos e, por um instante, ele viu não fraqueza, mas um reflexo de sua própria ferida. Elara encolheu-se, coração martelando como tambores de guerra distantes. Medo e curiosidade guerreavam dentro dela. Ele era o predador, ela a presa. Mas o locket pulsava, sussurrando de destinos entrelaçados. O rei avançou, sua sombra engolindo a luz, e o mundo pareceu prender a respiração. O sangue na neve congelando em padrões de estrelas caídas. Thorne's boot crunched the snow at the cavern's threshold, the sound a thunderclap in the stifled silence. Elara's pulse thundered in her ears, a wild rhythm echoing the distant howls that clawed at the night. She pressed deeper into the damp stone. The locket's warmth now a frantic beat against her ribs, as if it sensed the storm approaching in the form of this shadowed giant. His scent invaded the air, smoke from dying campfires, the sharp tang of blood not yet crusted, and beneath it, the earthy musk of alpha power tempered by weariness. Not the brute force of Liran's pack enforcers, but something heavier, like the weight of mountains borne on one man's shoulders. He paused, eyes narrowing in the moonlight's silver spill, scanning her huddled form. "Who are you?" His voice was low, gravel rough, carrying the timbre of commands issued in forgotten halls. No snarl, no immediate lunge. Curiosity flickered in those storm-gray depths, warring with the predator's instinct. Ilara's throat tightened. She could taste the fear on her tongue, metallic as the blood from her lip. Yet the locket hummed, a subtle vibration that drew her gaze to his neck, where a jagged scar traced a path from jaw to collarbone, pale against his skin. A mirror to her own hidden wounds, perhaps, or a warning of the violence that followed kings. "No one," she whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. The wind outside whipped fiercer, carrying the wolves' cries closer, their howls weaving through the pines like threads of unraveling fate. Thorne's head snapped toward the entrance, his hand flexing on the sword hilt. He was no stranger to pursuit. The lines etched around his eyes spoke of nights spent evading shadows longer than these wild beasts. Eldrath's throne had become a pyre. His father's murder, a spark that ignited betrayals among the allied packs. He had ridden into these wilds seeking solitude, answers in the moon's unblinking gaze, but now this Omega, fragile, bloodied, stirred something dormant, a pull as inexorable as the tide. The first wolf breached the tree line, its form a blur of white fur and gleaming fangs, eyes reflecting the moon like shattered mirrors. More followed, a pack of rogues drawn by the scent of vulnerability, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Thorne drew his blade in a fluid arc, the steel singing softly as it caught the light. "Stay back," he growled over his shoulder, positioning his body between her and the maw of the cave. Alara's breath hitched, instinct screamed to flee, to slip into the shadows and vanish as she had learned in exile. But the locket burned hotter, urging her forward as if the star within it aligned with the one hidden in his gaze. The lead wolf lunged, a whirlwind of claws and snapping jaws. Thorne met it mid-air, his sword biting deep into furred flesh. Blood sprayed, dark and steaming against the snow. painting crimson stars that bloomed and froze in the cold. He moved with lethal grace, each strike precise, born of battles that had claimed more than beasts, friends, allies, the innocence of a crown unworn. Alara watched, transfixed, the heat of combat flushing her chilled skin. Fear twisted into awe. This was no mere warrior, but a king haunted. His every parry laced with the regret of choices that echoed like weevu in empty halls. A second wolf circled, feinting left before darting right. It aimed not for Thorn, but for the cavern's mouth, yellow eyes fixed on her. Alara scrambled back, her hand closing around a loose stone, the rough edge grounding her terror. She hurled it with desperate force, striking the beast's flank. It yelped, stumbling, giving Thorn the opening to sever its throat. The body slumped, twitching, its blood pooling to mingle with the first's, a scarlet river carving paths through the white drifts. The alpha turned then, surprise etching his features, his chest heaving with exertion. "You fight," he said, not a question, but an observation that hung between them like mist. The remaining wolves hesitated, their howls fracturing into whines as Thorn advanced, blade dripping. They scattered into the night, tails low, the wind swallowing their retreat. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of embers in Alara's mind, visions flickering unbidden. Thorn's hand steadying a crumbling throne, her own fingers tracing the scar that marked his fall. She shook her head, banishing the haze. The locket cooled slightly, but its presence lingered, a bridge across the chasm of their solitude. Thorn sheathed his sword, the metallic rasp echoing her pounding heart. He stepped closer, not invading, but offering space laced with unspoken questions. Up close, the weariness was stark. Dirt-streaked armor dented from recent skirmishes, a cloak torn at the hem, heavy with the kingdom's dying weight. "The wilds claim the weak," he murmured, eyes tracing the locket's gleam at her throat. "Yet you endure. Why?" Alara met his gaze, the curiosity in it mirroring her own. Fear still coiled in her gut, rationalizing flight. He could bind her, use her as leverage against the packs that hunted him. But empathy stirred, unbidden, a recognition of shared exile, of bonds broken by duty's cruel hand. "Survival is not strength," she replied softly, the words tasting of her mother's lore. "It's the choice to protect what remains." The philosophy settled between them, heavy as fresh snow, challenging the walls they both had built. He nodded once, a flicker of melancholy softening his features. The moon watched overhead, its light filtering through the cavern like a benediction, illuminating the bloodied snow outside as patterns of fate etched in red and silver. Thorn turned to gather fallen branches, his movements deliberate, building a small fire at the cave's mouth. Flames leaped to life, casting golden flickers that danced with the locket's star, warming the air without chasing away the night's chill. Alara edged closer, the heat seeping into her bones, thawing the ice of isolation. In that shared glow, words began to flow, halting tales of rejection and loss, each confession a thread weaving empathy into something deeper, a bond forged not in passion, but in the quiet defiance of survival. As the fire crackled, embers rising like prayers to the indifferent stars, Alara wondered at the pull, resisted it as folly. Yet the locket whispered otherwise, its warmth a promise of paths converging. Thorn's eyes met hers across the flames, guilt and curiosity entwined, and for the first time since her banishment, the wind's howl felt less like a dirge and more like a call to something unspoken. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The fire's glow etched shadows on the cavern walls, turning the damp stone into a tapestry of flickering secrets. Alara sat cross-legged on the uneven floor, the warmth seeping through her chilled limbs, like a hesitant promise. Thorn fed the flames with twisted branches, his movements methodical, each snap of wood a punctuation to the night's unraveling quiet. The air carried the acrid bite of smoke mingled with the metallic undercurrent of spilled blood outside, where the wolves' carcasses lay stiffening under the moon's indifferent watch. She traced the locket's chain with numb fingers, its star-embossed surface now cool but resonant, as if it had absorbed the heat of their shared vigil. He settled across from her, the firelight carving hollows beneath his eyes, accentuating the scar that snaked across his throat like a frozen river. "Eldrath," he began, voice a low rumble that blended with the wind's distant moan. "My father built it from the bones of old wars, packs united under one banner, oaths sworn in blood under the full moon. But betrayal festers like rot in the roots." His gaze drifted to the flames, where embers danced like fallen stars, mirroring the locket's hidden glow. Ilara listened, her heart a taut string, pulled by the raw edge in his words. He spoke of the ambush that claimed his sire, arrows tipped with silver, loosed from shadows by a trusted beta advisor whose ambition outstripped loyalty. The kingdom teetered now, alliances fracturing like ice under spring thaw, rival alphas circling with promises of stability through conquest. Thorn had no mate, no heir. His line's end whispered in council halls, a curse he bore alone, guilt twisting like thorns in his chest for every life spent defending a crumbling throne. She nodded, the motion stirring the scent of pine and frost from her hair. Her own tale spilled forth in fragments, halting at first, then freer, like blood from a fresh wound. Liren's rejection replayed in her mind's eye. The ritual circles chill, the pack's murmurs like venomous wind, her omega nature branded a flaw in the forge of their ambitions. "They saw me as a chain, not a strength," she murmured, fingers brushing the locket, its warmth flickering back to life as if echoing her confession. Exile had stripped her bare, leaving only this heirloom, a relic of her mother's whispered legends, pathfinders, omegas attuned to the goddess's threads, guiding the lost through veils of fate. Ilara had buried those stories deep, rationalizing them as delusions born of fever and loss. Yet here, in this stranger's shadowed gaze, they stirred like embers refusing to die. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a fragile shoot in frozen soil. Thorn's eyes met hers, storm-gray depths reflecting the fire's gold, and for a moment the cavern shrank to the space between them. He was no captor, though instinct warned her he could be. His presence a gravitational pull, alpha essence wrapping around her like the cloak she lacked. She resisted, mind weaving barriers of logic. He was a king in flight, hunted by his own shadows, and she a discarded omega, unfit for thrones or bonds. Yet curiosity gnawed, drawing her closer to the flame's edge. "Guilt is a heavier crown than any forged in gold," she said softly, the philosophy slipping from her lips like a prayer. "What redeems a king who fights alone?" His laugh was bitter, a sound swallowed by the crackle of burning wood. "Redemption? Eldrath demands duty, not mercy. I've spilled blood for less than a whisper of peace." But his posture softened, the tension in his shoulders easing as he extended a water skin, the gesture simple, human amid the primal night. She accepted, their fingers brushing. A spark, not of fire, but of something deeper, instinctual. The locket pulsed then, warmer, as if approving the tentative bridge. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying not howls, but the faint thunder of hooves on snow, distant yet insistent. Thorn tensed, rising in a fluid motion, hand drifting to his sword. "Riders," he growled, peering into the moonlit gloom. "My pursuers or yours?" Ilara's breath caught, the locket's heat now a warning thrum. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, unbidden, like dreams bleeding into wakefulness. Cloaked figures on horseback, silver claw emblems glinting, Lyran's betas scouring the wilds for any trace of her survival, their orders laced with the pack's shame. But woven through were Thorn's shadows, Eldrath's traitors, betas turned rivals, their banners stained with the blood of broken oaths. The common enemy crystallized in her mind, ambition's blade, cutting across borders, binding their fates in crimson threads. She stood, the cavern's chill forgotten, empathy hardening into resolve. Both, she whispered, the word a vow. They hunt the broken to claim the whole. The riders crested the ridge, silhouettes against the moon's silver halo, torches flaring like accusatory eyes. Shouts pierced the night, a mix of Silverclaw snarls and Eldrath's guttural challenges, packs colliding in the wilds, drawn by scents of blood and fire. Thorn drew his blade, the steel whispering free, but he glanced back, positioning himself at the cavern's mouth once more. "Stay behind me," he commanded, yet his tone held no dominance, only the quiet ferocity of protection earned, not demanded. Alara gripped a jagged rock, her body humming with the locket's rhythm, fear alchemizing into something fiercer. The first rider charged, a Silverclaw beta with Lyran's mark on his saddle, lance lowered. Thorn parried, the clash ringing like a death knell, sparks flying to mingle with the snow. Alara's heart pounded, each beat syncing with the locket's pulse, and in that visceral storm, she felt the bond take root. Not love's blaze, but a tether of shared defiance. She hurled the rock, striking the rider's mount, sending it rearing into chaos. Thorn capitalized, his sword finding flesh, blood arcing hot and dark to freeze in midair. More came, a press of armored forms, blades clashing in a symphony of steel and grunts. Thorn fought like a tempest, each swing laced with the melancholy of a king who had lost too much to yield. Alara moved with him, not as prey, but partner, her instincts sharpened by exile's forge, dodging a stray arrow, stamping out a fallen torch that threatened to ignite the dry moss. The air thickened with sweat, iron, and the coppery reek of wounds, the moon bearing witness as snow churned to muddied slush under trampling boots. One attacker broke through, a hulking Eldrath turncoat, eyes wild with betrayal's madness. He lunged for Alara, gauntleted hand outstretched to seize her as trophy. She twisted, the locket swinging free, its chain catching the moonlight in a blinding flash. The man faltered, as if the star within had pierced his resolve, and Thorn's blade ended the threat in a spray of red. Panting, they stood amid the fallen, the survivors fleeing into the night, their retreat a howl of frustration swallowed by the wind. Thorn turned to her, blood streaking his armor like war paint, his breath ragged. "You could have run," he said, voice threaded with wonder and wariness, the guilt in his eyes deepening at the risk she had chosen. Alara met his stare, the locket settling warm against her skin, its light a quiet revelation. Rationalization crumbled. This was no folly, but a choice. Mercy in battle, compassion amid carnage. "And leave you to the storm alone?" she replied, the words a bridge across their wounds. In that moment, under the moon's eternal gaze, empathy forged into bond, fragile yet unbreakable, the fire's embers whispering of destinies entwined in blood and starlight. Yet as silence reclaimed the cavern, a deeper dilemma stirred in Alara's soul. Was this refuge a salvation, or the prelude to a war that would demand her hidden gift, forcing her to choose between freedom's solitude and a king's shadowed redemption? The locket warmed, unanswered as the night deepened its hold. The dawn crept in like a thief, pale light seeping through the cavern's jagged mouth, turning the bloodied snow outside into a mosaic of crimson veins etched in frost. Alara stirred from a fitful sleep, her body aching from the night's frenzy, the locket's chain tangled in her hair like a lover's insistent grasp. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals, their faint crackle a reminder of the fragile warmth they had shared. Thorn stood sentinel at the entrance, his silhouette a dark sentinel against the whitening world, sword propped beside him, cleaned but bearing the ghosts of fresh kills in its subtle nicks. His breath misted in the chill air, steady and measured. But Ilara sensed the undercurrent of unrest in him, the way his shoulders bore the invisible yoke of a kingdom unraveling thread by thread. She rose quietly, the stone floor biting into her bare soles, sending shivers up her spine that had little to do with cold. The air hung heavy with the scent of charred wood and congealed blood, a metallic whisper that clung to her skin like accusation. Last night's bond lingered, not as passion's fire, but as a quiet tether, pulling her toward him even as doubt coiled in her chest. What was this pull, if not the folly of two exiles mistaking survival for salvation? The locket warmed against her breast, a subtle throb that quickened her pulse, as if it anticipated the unraveling yet to come. Visions had teased her dreams again, fleeting glimpses of Thorn enthroned in a hall of ice, his scar glowing like molten silver, while shadows of betrayers closed in, their blades dripping with the blood of oaths broken. She had dismissed them as echoes of exhaustion, but now, in the gray light, they felt heavier, like prophecies etched in her bones. Thorn turned as she approached, his gray eyes catching the first rays, softening from storm to ash. "The riders scattered, but they will regroup," he said, voice low, laced with the melancholy of a man who knew pursuit as intimately as his own shadow. "Silverclaw and my own turncoats, ambition binds them like wolves to a fresh kill." He glanced at the locket, its star glinting faintly, and something flickered in his gaze. Not desire, but recognition, as if it mirrored the void in his chest. Ilara nodded, words failing her. The night's confessions had stripped them bare, revealing wounds that mirrored too closely. Her rejection a personal exile, his a throne poisoned by guilt. Yet empathy had woven them closer, transforming fear into alliance, curiosity into a reluctant trust. She rationalized it still. He needed a guide through these wilds, nothing more, though the locket's heat argued otherwise, urging her to see the threads he could not. They broke camp in silence, the wind rising like a mournful dirge through the pines, carrying distant weevoo that spoke of packs regrouping under the moon's lingering influence. Thorn led the way, his strides purposeful yet weary, cutting a path through the drifts toward higher ground where the Frostfang peaks loomed like jagged teeth against the sky. Ilara followed, the snow crunching underfoot, each step a meditation on choice, freedom in solitude or the peril of binding her fate to a king's shadowed quest. The locket swung with her motion, its warmth building, sinking with her heartbeat until it felt like an extension of her will, a compass pointing not north, but inward. As they crested a ridge, the world unfolded in breathtaking desolation. A vast plateau blanketed in snow, ringed by ancient standing stones that thrust from the white like the ribs of some colossal beast. The air hummed here, charged with an otherworldly hush, the wind whispering secrets in a language of ice and echo. Thorn halted, his hand raised in warning, eyes scanning the horizon. "This is the Vale's edge," he murmured, the name heavy with lore, "where the goddesses' threads thin and fates bleed into one another. My father sought visions here before his fall, answers to Eldrath's decay." But his voice trailed, for the plateau was not empty. Faint tracks marred the snow, leading to a central stone etched with lunar runes, half buried in drift. Ilara's breath caught, the locket flaring hot against her skin, a burn that spread through her veins like liquid starlight. Unbidden, the visions surged, not fragments now, but a torrent crashing over her like a blizzard's fury. She saw Thorn's past in vivid strokes, the ambush under a blood moon, arrows whistling through torchlit gloom, his father's roar cut short by betrayal's blade. Blood pooled on marble floors, staining banners of silver and gold, while the Beta advisor, Kale, his name a hiss in her mind, slipped away with a smile like poisoned honey. Then forward. Eldrath's halls crumbling, rival alphas storming the gates, Thorn's sword arm weary. His line severed unless a hidden path was forged. And woven through it all, her own thread, the Omega Pathfinder, her bloodline's gift, attuned to the Deusa's loom, revealing destinies obscured by shadow and ambition. She gasped, stumbling forward, hands clutching the locket as if to stem the flood. The world tilted, snow swirling in unnatural eddies around her, the standing stones glowing faintly with inner light. Thorn whirled, catching her as she swayed, his grip firm on her arms, alpha strength tempered by concern. "Elara, what sorcery is this?" His eyes widened, tracing the ethereal glow emanating from the locket, now pulsing like a captive star, casting silver veins across the snow that mapped unseen paths, routes through the mountains. Hidden passes to Eldrath's heart, threads leading straight to Kael's lair in the shadowed vales. The visions coalesced, sharpening into clarity. She was the key, her gift the loom that could reweave his frayed kingdom, exposing traitors and mending alliances through revelations only a Pathfinder could unveil. But it demanded price. Her essence poured into the threads, risking the erasure of her own fragile freedom, binding her to a destiny that might consume her as surely as exile had nearly done. Thorn's face paled, realization dawning like moonlight on bloodied steel. "You see it?" he whispered, awe and guilt warring in his voice, the weight of his broken realm pressing harder now that hope dangled within reach. "The goddess's mark, on you. My father's lore spoke of such omegas, guides through the veil. But to ask this of you." Elara pulled back, the locket cooling as the visions receded, leaving her drained, the wind's howl a echo of her inner turmoil. Tears froze on her lashes, the revelation a double-edged blade. Power in her veins, but chains in its wake. He was no longer just a fugitive king. She was the star to his shadowed throne, yet acceptance meant surrendering the solitude she had clawed from rejection's jaws. "It's not sorcery," she said, voice trembling with the philosophy of her mother's whispers. "It's the burden of seeing what others cannot, what redeems and what destroys." The plateau fell silent, the stones bearing witness as Thorn's hand lingered near hers. The bond deepening into something irrevocable, a destiny revealed under the indifferent sky. In that frozen expanse, with blood's memory staining the snow and the locket's light fading like a spent ember, Elara faced the precipice. To embrace her gift was to step into his war, to heal a king's wound at the cost of her own rebirth. The wind carried no answers, only the distant thunder of approaching storms, moral tempests that would demand choices sharper than any blade. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The storm gathered like a predator's breath, heavy clouds swallowing the moon's pale vigil as Elara and Thorn descended from the vale's edge, the plateau's revelations clinging to her like frost on fevered skin. The locket thrummed against her chest, a relentless pulse that mapped not just paths through the snow, but fractures in her resolve, visions of Thorn's throne splintering under Kael's shadow, her own exile a thread in the unraveling tapestry. She walked in silence, the wind whipping her cloak into ragged sails, each gust carrying the chill of choices unmade. Freedom whispered in the solitude of the wilds, a siren's call to vanish into the pines and reclaim the anonymity her banishment had forged. Yet the bond tugged, insistent as the locket's warmth, drawing her toward the king's shadowed war, where compassion might mend what power had broken or shatter her utterly. Thorn led them through a narrow ravine, its walls sheer cliffs of ice-veined granite that funneled the wind into howling laments. His steps were measured, the weight of his armor a metaphor for the guilt that bowed his frame. He glanced back often, eyes searching hers for fracture, as if her gift's emergence had etched new scars on his soul. "The pass leads to the Silverclaw borders," he said, voice cutting through the gale like a blade through silk. Kael's spies infest these lands, your old pack's enforcers, my traitors, all converging like wolves on a wounded stag. We face them now, or they claim us piecemeal. His words hung heavy, laced with the melancholy of a ruler who had spilled blood for loyalty only to harvest betrayal. Elara nodded, her heart a storm of its own, love's fragile seed warring with liberty's fierce root. To aid him was to forgive the hierarchies that had cast her out, to choose redemption over the wild's indifferent embrace. The ravine widened into a frozen meadow, ringed by skeletal birches whose branches clawed at the sky like desperate pleas. Snow swirled in eddies, blinding and disorienting, until the thunder of hooves shattered the illusion of isolation. They crested a low rise, and there, under the storm's bruised underbelly, the confrontation unfolded. A ragged assembly of riders, Silverclaw betas flanked by Eldrath's turncoats, their torches sputtering like accusatory eyes in the gathering dark. At their fore rode Liren, his beta bulk swathed in furs stained with the road's grime, eyes narrowing on Elara with the cold disdain of one who had severed a bond without remorse. Beside him, Kael, Thorn's erstwhile advisor, sat tall on a black stallion, his face a mask of false piety, the scar of old ambition twisting his smile. Banners fluttered, silver claws entwined with fractured crowns, symbols of alliances forged in treachery's forge. Thorn drew his sword, the steel whispering free with a sound like cracking ice, positioning himself before her as the riders fanned out, encircling the meadow in a noose of steel and snarls. "Thorn!" Kael called, his voice oily as blood on snow, carrying over the wind's rising wail. "You've fled long enough. Eldrath craves a true king, one who claims what's his, not wanders with strays." His gaze slid to Elara. Lingering on the locket's gleam, recognition flickering like malice in torchlight. Liren's lip curled, a growl rumbling from his chest. "The Omega returns, tainted by your scent. We came to erase her shame, now we end yours." The air thickened with the reek of oiled leather and simmering rage, howls echoing from the tree line as unseen packs closed in, the moon's absence amplifying the primal fury. Alara's pulse thundered, the locket burning like a brand, visions assaulting her in staccato bursts. Liren's blade at her throat during the rejection rite, the pack's chants a dirge of unworthiness. Kael's whisper in Thorn's ear, plotting the ambush that felled a king, blood pooling like spilled stars. She stepped forward, ignoring Thorn's warning hand, the snow crunching under her feet like brittle bones. "Shame?" she echoed, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the philosophy of her exile rising like bile. "You cast me out for weakness, yet here you hunt with traitors. What is power if it devours its own?" Liren's face twisted, spurring his mount forward, lance leveled. But Thorn met him in a clash that shook the earth, swords ringing, sparks flying to die in the drifts. The battle erupted, a visceral storm of flesh and fury. Thorn fought with the grace of a melancholic reaper, each parry laced with the guilt of lives he could not save, his blade carving through a beta's guard to spill hot blood that steamed and froze in crimson arcs. Elara dodged a lunging turncoat, her body honed by wild's cruelty, snatching a fallen dagger from the snow. The locket guided her, its heat illuminating threads in the chaos, a hidden archer in the birches, Kael's signal to his archers. She hurled the dagger, true as fate, felling the bowman before his arrow found Thorn's back. Pain lanced her side as a claw grazed her, tearing cloth and skin, blood welling warm and slick, mingling with the meadow's white canvas. Yet she pressed on, the wound a baptism in the fire of choice, her gift weaving paths through the melee. A feint here, a vulnerability exposed there, turning the tide not with brute force, but revelation's edge. Kael circled, his sword flashing toward Thorn in a traitor's strike, but Elara intercepted, the locket flaring as she blocked with scavenged steel. Their eyes locked, his cold calculation against her burning resolve, and in that instant she saw his web entire. Alliances bought with lies. Lyran's pack promised Eldrath's fringes for her capture, a union of exiles to mask their sins. "You see too much," Kyle hissed, pressing the attack, but Thorn arrived like judgment incarnate, disarming him with a sweep that sent the advisor sprawling into the snow. Lyran charged then, a bellow of rage, his lance aimed at Alara's heart, betrayal's final echo. She sidestepped, the locket's pulse sinking with her breath, and Thorn's sword met flesh, ending the enforcer in a spray of red that painted the birches like autumn's wrath. The survivors broke, fleeing into the storm's maw, their howls fracturing into whimpers swallowed by wind and shadow. Thorn knelt amid the fallen, bloodied but unbowed, his gray eyes lifting to hers with a mix of awe and sorrow. Kale lay bound at his feet, the traitor's mask cracked, revealing the fear beneath ambition's veneer. "Mercy or the blade?" Thorn asked, voice raw, extending the choice to her, the Omega whose visions had unmasked his foe. Alara's side throbbed, blood seeping through her fingers, the locket cooling as the adrenaline ebbed. Forgiveness tempted, a path to heal the wounds of rejection, to bind her freedom to love's redemptive chain. War's continuation promised isolation's sharp liberty, sparing her the throne's devouring light. "What is justice?" she whispered, philosophy trembling on her lips, "if not the mercy that redeems the breaker?" The storm broke then, rain lashing the meadow like tears from the veiled moon, washing blood into rivulets that carved moral sigils in the earth. Thorn waited, his hand outstretched, guilt etching deeper lines on his face, as Alara stood at the precipice, love's war or freedom's exile. The locket silent, the choice hers alone in the howling night. Rain lashed the meadow like the goddess's own fury, turning snow to slush that clung to Alara's wounds, each drop a stinging reminder of the blood she had spilled and the paths she had chosen. The storm's howl drowned the distant wivu, but in her chest the locket's silence roared louder, a void waiting to be filled by her will. Kyle knelt in the mud, wrists bound by Thorn's belt, his once smug eyes now hollowed by the unraveling of his schemes, rain tracing rivulets down his face like tears of a traitor unmasked. Lyran's body lay nearby, a crumpled testament to rejected bonds, his blood diluting into the earth, feeding roots that might one day bloom with something other than vengeance. Thorn stood over them both, sword lowered but ready, his gray gaze fixed on Alara, heavy with the melancholy of a king who had long carried the weight of judgments not his own. His armor, dented and slick with rain, gleamed dully under the storm's veil, the scar on his neck a pale lightning bolt against his skin. She pressed a hand to her side, the gash throbbing with each heartbeat, warm crimson seeping between her fingers to mingle with the deluge. Pain grounded her, sharpening the visions that lingered like afterimages. Kale's web of lies, threads of ambition that had snared Thorn's father, poisoned Eldrath's halls, and even woven through her own exile. Lyran's cruelty a knot in the larger tapestry. Mercy tempted her now, not as weakness, but as the ultimate strength, a forgiveness that could sever the cycle of blood debts, allowing her to step free into the wild's embrace, unburdened by a throne's shadows. Yet union called too. The bond that had sparked in the cavern's fire, now a flame tempered by battle, promising redemption not for him alone, but for the Omega who had been deemed unworthy. Love was no glittering prize, but a forge of choices, where compassion could heal wounds deeper than steel ever cut. "Justice without heart is just another betrayal," she murmured, the words tasting of her mother's lore, philosophy born from rejection's bitter forge. Thorn's breath hitched, rain matting his dark hair to his brow, his posture a study in restrained turmoil, guilt for the lives his rule had cost, duty chaining him to a kingdom fraying at the edges. He had inherited ashes, no mate to steady the line, his solitude a curse that the goddess seemed intent on breaking through her unlikely pathfinder. "The choice is yours, Elara," he said, voice a low thunder beneath the gale, extending the sword's hilt toward her like an offering. Kael's death ends the threat, secures Eldrath's borders, but your hand on the blade, it binds us or frees you. His eyes searched hers, storm-gray depths reflecting the turmoil she felt, the pull of their shared exile now, a tether strong as any mate bond, resisted yet undeniable. She had rationalized it as survival's illusion, but here, amid the carnage, it bloomed into truth. He was broken by betrayal's blade, and she, born to mend such fractures, not with magic alone, but with the mercy of seeing his worth beyond the crown. The wind tore at her cloak, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the earthy musk of upturned soil, the meadow a battlefield baptized in renewal's storm. Elara stepped forward, the mud sucking at her feet like the wilds reluctant to release her. Visions flickered one last time, the locket warming faintly, illuminating a future where Thorn's throne stood firm, not on conquest, but on alliances reborn from forgiveness. Her gift, the loom that wove paths of peace through war's remnants. Kael's gaze lifted, pleading now, the traitor's mask fully shattered, revealing a man who had chosen power over kin, much like Lyran had cast her aside for ambition's hollow gleam. To kill him would be justice's easy stroke, echoing the hierarchies that had scarred her. To spare him, a sacrifice of vengeance, demanding she pour her essence into healing not just Thorn, but the fractured packs that encircled Eldrath like wolves scenting decay. She took the hilt, the leather grip slick and warm from his palm, a transfer of not just steel, but the burden of rule. The blade hovered, trembling in her grasp, rain cascading along its edge like tears unshed. "Mercy crowns the fallen," she whispered, the philosophy settling like snow on embers, and with a deliberate turn, she drove the pommel into Kael's temple, not to kill, but to subdue, binding him for trial under the moon's returning gaze. The advisor slumped, unconscious, his fate now Thorn's to judge in the light of day. A chance for redemption, however slim, that mirrored her own rebirth from exile's depths. Thorn exhaled, a sound of profound relief laced with awe, his hand closing over hers on the hilt, the contact a spark that ignited the bond fully, not in passion's rush, but in the quiet profundity of mutual choice. The storm eased as if appeased, clouds parting to reveal the moon's fractured face, silver light spilling over the meadow like a benediction. Elara released the sword, her wound's pain fading to a dull ache, the locket cooling to a gentle throb against her skin, a symbol no longer of isolation, but of paths converged. Thorn pulled her close, not in conquest, but in union's tender forge, his arms a shelter against the wind's dying whispers. "You rewrite my rule," he murmured into her hair, voice thick with the guilt lifting like mist at dawn. "In blood and starlight, as the goddess intended." She leaned into him, the alpha's warmth seeping through her chills, rationalization yielding to acceptance. Love as proof, redeeming them both from rejection's shadow, birthing a kingdom where compassion tempered power, and omegas like her guided alphas through the veil. They bound Kael and gathered what remained of the fallen, Lyran's form to return to Silverclaw as a bridge to uneasy peace, the turncoat's weapons a trophy of moral victory. As dawn's first gold kissed the peaks, they set out for Eldrath, the locket swinging like a star reclaimed, its light a promise of renascimento. Elara walked beside Thorn, no longer captive or exile, but consort in destiny's weave, her gift a flame that would heal the dying realm. The wind carried no more howls of pursuit, only the soft sigh of snow settling, and in her heart the philosophy crystallized. Strength was choosing mercy, turning wounds to wings, rejection to rain. Under the moon's watchful eye, Blood and Starlight forged a new covenant, where every scar became a story of redemption and love, eternal proof of souls entwined. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.